sad about making a great character is, or losing a great character is, make another great character.
Yep. One of the things that I've discussed is I had a friend of mine who he and I play a lot of like buffer LARPs, and he always just goes out into combat with blinders. He cannot get like battlefield awareness. He just finds a target and just pounds it into the dirt, and then he picks a new target, which means that a lot of the time people just back up as he advances. He gets surrounded and he dies.
Yeah.
And he has died so many times in games where you have multiple lives that when his characters eventually perm, some people have kind of poo-pooed, like, you're not playing the game right, you're doing things wrong, that kind of stuff. But every time one of his characters die, he's made enough of a connection with other characters where there are people literally crying or singing eulogies about the character. And it's like, if anything, it adds to the universe. It adds to the world that sometimes people just die.
Yeah.
And if he's giving that connection point of people are getting into his characters in such a short amount of time between his characters, I'm talking about Hargis.
Oh, I figured as much. After listening to all of you talk, I now know exactly where I want to take this, at least as a beginning point, and then we'll talk into a lot of the other things that this topic usually will segue and tangent into. And we are live. Welcome to Live Action Roleplay with
Kai Norman
and Ryan Omega. We are here at Gen Con with our very special guest. Introduce yourself, please.
Matthew Webb from Jackalope Live Action Studios.
All right. So, per our tradition, what are we drinking today?
We are drinking, in true Texas fashion, warm Dr. Pepper.
Warm Dr. Pepper. Cheers.
Yep.
Except for fancy McIce over here.
I might have stopped at an A&W.
With ice and Dr. Pepper.
Right.
All right. Shout-outs. Do we have any shout-outs that we want to give to anybody, people, places, objects?
I'm gonna give a brief shout out to my whole Maze Arcana crew. We've been running around and rolling around together at the con for the last couple of days. This is Friday for. Is it Friday?
It is Friday.
Okay, good. This is I can't remember. It means a good con. So it's Friday at Gen Con. Quite a few of us arrived on Wednesday, and we've been doing things since then. Things are starting to ramp up more, and we've got some shows later in the evening. So like the whole team is just really holding each other together and working so well, and I really appreciate all of them.
Let me see. So for me, my shout out is pretty much going to be the same thing, but I'm going to extend that to a lot of the people here at Gen Con. I've been meeting so many wonderful people, not just people in the pro scene, but a lot of fans who are very, very thankful, very, very talkative. They're very, very eager to express how much they love their characters, how much they love this con, how much they love gaming. And I haven't been here for 15 years. Wow. And so coming back to it and seeing how much gaming has grown, seeing the types of panels that are out there, seeing the types of concerns that are now legitimately being addressed for gamers and a much wider, diverse audience that is now reaching is inspiring and wonderful to see.
Not if I give a shout out?
Yes, please.
I have to give a shout out to White Wolf Entertainment because they're the ones who invited us here, and we're hanging out at their booth all weekend. And Jason Carl and Martin Erickson, the whole crew, just being fantastic. And Vampire 5th Edition is doing really well, and they're really helping us promote our game in November. So big shout out to them. And if you haven't checked out 5th Edition Vampire, oh my God, it is so pretty and so good.
It looks like a Vogue magazine, a coffee table quality type of book. In fact, we're recording on top of said book right now.
It also makes a very good phone stand.
Actually, you mentioned your event. When is that coming up, and what event is that?
We are doing The Night in Question, November 17th in Austin, Texas. It is a splatterpunk horror experience set in White Wolf's World of Darkness, featuring a blood rave of the Sabbat, and where most of the players show up as mortal characters and to a rave out in the middle of nowhere outside of Texas, outside of Austin, in the big empty of Texas, and things get interesting.
That sounds awesome. I'm immediately thinking of like the blood rave scene in Blade.
little bit of that, a little bit of From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah?
A little bit of, we got people who usually do haunted houses doing makeup and props for us, a lot of people who've done horror LARPs before, and we're just going to make it into like a crazy, just horror, we call this style splatterpunk.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's going to be buckets of blood and just... We want people to come out of this basically saying, like, that was like the old illustrations in the old Sabbat books of, like, people hanging from meat hooks and, like, blood fountains and all that crazy stuff that you don't really get to do in a LARP that often. It takes too much setup. You can say, oh, it's terrible, I'm going to describe it, but it's a little bit different when you get covered in it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just hearing about this particular LARP, I had to check in with myself because this is the LARP that I want to experience, but I also know I do not do well in haunted houses. So I know it's not a LARP for everyone, but it sounds like a very encompassing experience for the right players.
For the right players, and we do encourage people to know their limits, and we encourage people to not just check in on them. We try to be very transparent about what's going to be on there. If you go to front and center on our webpage, if you see it, there's a section that says content guidelines and like safety, and where you say, during the game you might realize, I thought I was ready for this, I'm not. And we actually have a lot of like mechanics that we are going to workshop ahead of time for saying, this is the hand signal for I'm done, and everyone knows that's the hand signal for I'm done, and everyone leaves you alone, and we have a sanctuary space set up on site that's away from the music and everything, and you can sit down, you can take a breath, you can decide whether you want to go back to the hotel, you can decide whether or what you want to go back in, maybe you just need some water, and we have a safety team on board who are going to be both manning that sanctuary space, but also patrolling the area to make sure everybody is okay, because we want people to have people have an intense experience, but we don't want to have people to have something that they look back on and regret. That's the last thing we want. So we want to have an experience where people go, that was fun, it was once in a lifetime, it was amazing, and I was scared out of my wits, but it wasn't bad. And we want people to be able to gauge themselves and gauge each other. We encourage check-in with other players. If you see somebody freaking out, we actually have... And this is gaining a lot of popularity in a lot of LARPs right now, called the check-in hand signal, which is
the OK one, right?
Yeah, the OK one. Mm-hmm. And if you go to Jackalope-LARP, we have our guide, the Jackalope Guide to Playing Hard and Safe, which has got neat little illustrations of all these hand signals we use.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a lot of the LARPs on the West Coast that Ryan and I take part in involve those kinds of hand symbols as well. I'm really glad that is kind of becoming like a standard that everyone is basing off of.
Oh, yeah.
Because the more people who have the same symbology to mean the same thing, it becomes just like a language of LARP. Mm-hmm. And that means like wherever you go, you know that you have the safety to kind of tap out if you need to.
Yeah. And we have the bow out signal. And there's like little regional variations and stuff that we develop. But for the most part, I think that a lot of people have this misconception that if you have these like check-in techniques, it kind of blunts the experience. Mm-hmm. But it's actually the opposite. It actually makes it a lot sharper, because it means that you kind of have a way of making sure you're not going too far, so you have confidence. Mm-hmm. And you don't get into the situation where like, okay, is Ryan okay? Do I have to guess how far he wants to go? As opposed to Ryan can let me know he's okay or let me know to back off.
Having full license and consent to know that you can just like hammer into someone, and if you're in the middle of like starting to ramp up and you do your check-in symbol and they're giving you the thumbs up and you're like, okay, guess I'm gonna roll my sleeves, here we go.
Yeah.
And like having that kind of the consent there to know that you can kind of rip into someone is really important. I only do that with my friends who I know very well, but actually I feel like this ties in really nicely into something that I read before I even knew who you were. And before we got to meet, I've been a fan of your blog for a while.
Oh, thank you. The full reverse.
Yep. Yeah. And so in there, I found an amazing article that was getting bounced around a few different LARP communities. I found it in the Dystopia Rising groups, and it was called the LARP Antagonist's Oath.
Yes. That came from a very long kind of analysis I took of where I love film analysis. I love like people doing story analysis, and I started watching these really great, like, there's these great long form videos on YouTube about films, right? And they say, why does the Joker work as an antagonist, right? Why does he work that way? And what makes for a good antagonist versus just somebody you hate, right? And I started thinking about that and how it applies to LARP and how people inform their experiences, and that came to this article that you're talking about, the antagonist oath. But so what did you like about it, I guess, would you believe?
The aspects that I appreciated the most were the emphasis that narrative is key, and if you are taking on being a bad guy, a lot of people kind of think, being a bad guy is easy. If you want to be a bad guy and potentially risk, alienating yourself from the community or giving someone a bad time because they might not know you and therefore might not trust you to, have you kind of doing these things, and the bleed happens where they're not sure if you as a person are angry or mad or taking something out on them when it is actually in reality, hopefully, just a character to character.
Right.
I really enjoyed that there was so much kind of emphasis on, if you are going to be an antagonist, you've got more responsibility.
Yes.
Because you get to be bad to people, but then you have to be extra nice as well.
And you have to realize that you're secondary to the story the moment you're an antagonist. The antagonist exists to make the protagonist grow and change and to provoke weaknesses, right, and make those weaknesses into strengths. And if you look at how antagonists work, like good antagonists work, is that they are strong where the hero is weak, but they present a challenge, and their defeats aren't ultimate. And one of the things that when you have very conflict-driven, competitive LARP environments, there might be villains, but there's not very, very many good antagonists, because an antagonist shouldn't end the story of the protagonist. And what we find in a lot of games, especially in these big LARP games, is that what makes you a villain? I go around killing people or go around smashing things, and there's no real recourse against me. And that's not a good antagonist from a story perspective. A story perspective is that you're a continuance of the story. You're a foil, right? And that's what makes a good antagonist. So you have to ask yourself, as if I'm saying I'm playing an antagonistic character, am I pushing back against these people in a way that grows and changes the character? Because the protagonist in the story is by definition the one who changes. Darth Vader doesn't change that much, except for very towards the end where he stops being an antagonist in that moment in the Emperor's throne. He switches, and that's the moment he changes. Antagonists don't change. Protagonists are the ones that change. But the antagonist is that which provokes change. We're getting deep into the story.
I love this, though. Yeah. It's that kind of psychology, and I want to use the word awareness, that really ramps up and heightens good experiences. So when you've got someone who is experienced like yourself, who can play a good antagonist, it means that people feel safe around that. And they're like, this is going to be super cool. I have like my nemesis, and it's you collaborating with another person to create story, which is what LARP is all about. LARP is not about winning. LARP is about collaborating to make a story.
LARP is many things to many people, so it's really hard to say there's one thing.
That's fair.
I would say the LARPs I prefer are about creating a big story with a lot of people who know what they're coming at. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying it's very, very hard to say LARP is about this, because you have on one end of the spectrum you have the people with the boffer swords that are just sitting there like, stick jockeying, right, as it's known. And then you have the other complete ones that are completely free form, and you play a rock. And I'm not making that up. There's a LARP where you play a rock. I played it. It's interesting.
Did it really rock?
For those you can't tell, I'm golf clapping. But not to get off that topic, but it's just that, there's a reason why when I play in my games, even if I'm just a player, like I currently play in the Mai's Eye Society game, is I have something called the Friendly Enemies rule, which is stolen from John Wick, who is a really talented RPG designer. He runs John Wick Presents. He's also done stuff for 7th Sea and for Legend of the Five Rings.
I believe he created 7th Sea.
I believe he did, yes. Yeah. And he also created another game called Houses of the Blooded, which is fantastic.
One game that I definitely wanted it to play.
Yes, Houses of the Blooded is a fantastic game. It should get more attention than it gets.
Yeah.
But one of the things he mentions there, I don't know if he came up with it there. He probably didn't. But he mentions the friendly enemies rule, which is if you're going to establish an antagonism with another player, you talk to them out of character and you say, "This is what I want to do. Would it be fun for you?" And I play that way even when I'm playing in the Mind's Eye Society, which is an old school vampire LARP. And people just have their minds blown. They have their mind blown that I'm walking up and say, "Hey, my character's going to gun for yours. Is that all right?" And they're like, And, a lot of the times, though, when they say yes, they really appreciate it. You establish this is what this antagonism is. And more importantly, this is the limits of it. So you can have frenemies. Because you've said to each other, you know what, I'm not going to try and kill you. I'm just going to be catty at you, right? And I love playing antagonists that are good foils and antagonists and flawed. And I like playing good villains. But I don't like ending people's stories. I really don't like ending people's story. I want people's story to grow. And the only time I've really ended people's story is when they've either consented to it or when they've left me no choice, usually by out of character reasons, they left me no choice but to end that story. Because it's like your story is not compatible with everyone else's story, and it's to allow it to continue would destroy the shared fantasy of the game.
Yeah, and even for me in Twin Mask, a long time ago, we had a character that was very dedicated to playing a character that was problematic, and that was fine. But the problem came up when he was doing things in character that was at such a level that it became almost the equivalent of you are now a threat to national security that is now ruining or affecting how everybody else has to play.
Right.
And regardless of the fact that that player said, well, I'm playing my character true, the only reasonable reaction at that point when everybody at that point is now hindered in how they can play that character was to stop that character.
Right.
And it was a conversation where, do we talk to this person out of character? And the answer was yes. But does he still want to keep playing that character that way? The answer was yes. So we had to deliver a consequence that was in character to get that to stop.
And there's also this thing where you're not entitled to play any character you want. Yeah. You never are. And, it's better for everyone if you don't. I mean, I played for 6 months in EMS. I played a Toreador anti-tribe who was Sabat Toreador, his name was Pierce Cross. He was a straight up psychotic murdering artist who killed people and turned them into sculptures. Before I brought that character into play, he's kind of a stock Sabat character. He's based loosely on one of the ones from the original Sabat guide. I went to the ST and I said, "Is this appropriate? This is something straight out of Hannibal Lecter, and are you cool with this in your Sabat venue?" And I wanted to play that character in a game that did not have safety signals, because I'm sitting there describing and doing things, talking about crazy stuff, because this is something out of Silence of the Lambs that I'm playing, because that's what a Sabat Toreador is as written. And
things that could potentially really emotionally upset a player who is, kind of witnessing or being a part of that scene.
Yeah, and we had a player who was 100% down with it, but she realized she had a thing about eyes, and something came up involving that, eyes getting plucked out, and so she bowed out of the scene, and that's fine. Yeah, you bow out of the scene, you're done. Right, but that goes back to this safety signal thing. It lets that scene continue, and when she walks out and she has the bow down symbol, which is you put your hand on the back of your head and you lower your head, and that means I'm done out of character. Leave me alone. Assume that I had a perfectly in character reason for leaving the scene. Cool, and you just leave it alone. And she was able to do that, and we were doing the scene where there was a bet which involved Pierce, and she was able to do that. So that gave me the comfort to kind of explore the like more darker, horrific stuff, while also not feeling like I had to. Obviously there's limits. There's always like, and there should be limits on content, and those should be clearly communicated. But within those limits, that doesn't mean everybody is like consenting to that content.
Exactly.
So they should be able to withdraw their consent.
Giving the agency and control for players to kind of opt out of something that they feel vastly uncomfortable with. And it might not... we've talked about this before. Sometimes in those environments, you can't just opt out of, like, a character doing something to your character.
Right.
But it can basically be like, and now fade to black.
Right. And
we are not going to continue the scene. Here's the resolution. Like... I did it to mug you, so my character mugs you.
Yeah.
And then you focus more on the emotions and the well-being of the player rather than the character in that moment.
And I think that you should always be cautious about even... You can justify doing and not doing anything in character. That's kind of why when I'm running games, it's what my character would do is kind of a hollow statement for me, because you can always say that.
Yep.
So the question is that what does this add to the game, and is everyone cool with it?
Yep.
Obviously, there's a point in which you're avoiding consequences for your actions, like you said with the guy saying, I'm playing my character correctly. I'm like, well, you can adjust your character. Yeah. Characters change. Characters might realize that they're not in the position they should be. But that doesn't mean every character fits every game.
Or facing, I think a lot of the whole murder hobo kind of like mindset that some players get into when they're playing, especially LARPs. I see it happen in D&D and other roleplay games a bit, but when players start LARPing, I feel like they get even more of an initial disconnect with actions have consequences, because they're like, I'm the hero of the story. Yes, you are. And the next step from there is, I can do anything. It's like, yes, you potentially can. And then the storytellers, if they're on their roll, are going to follow up with believable repercussions and so forth to necessarily happen. And that doesn't mean that character is going to be punished every time. Like, if they have good ways of getting out of something, then absolutely, they deserve to get out of it. But...
You're dealing with a much more complex ecosystem in a LARP, where you're dealing with, since you're the population of the city, you can be the exception in a tabletop game that gets away with murder and gets away with things that would be punishable by death immediately, while all the other characters are like that.
I just wanted to take this back to a style of LARP that that the night to... Oh my God.
The night in question.
Thank you. The night in question is going to be running in this style, which is the bespoke style. Can you explain a little bit of what that is and how this ties into the conversation of antagonism, especially as every player is also a potential antagonist in this game?
Yes, this is not a game full of good people. The players are great. The characters are not nice people. So, like, contrary, like, we're talking about, like, these competitive games and these, like, conflict-driven games where it's like, I want to do something that's against you, right? And bespoke actually comes from a very different angle, because it's about consent and collaborative play, where nothing happens to your character that you don't want to have happen. But there's this culture about, like, how do we make a story? So in the night in question, the concept is that there's this illegal rave going on and people are showing up to it, but it's actually been set up by a group of horrible monstrous vampires in order to make a whole bunch more monstrous vampires to go kill a whole bunch of other vampires. And it's going to go into a crazy kind of horrific night. But in order to do that kind of content over a single night, we're doing this style called bespoke, which is started up in Europe and we transferred over here, where nothing happens to you without your consent out of character. But that doesn't mean the only things that happen are things your character wants to happen. It's what kind of story you want to tell and what kind of story you negotiate with your other players. So you can say, like, I'm playing an evil vampire, you're playing a mortal, I've decided, like, you know, I go to you and say, okay, I want you to be the candidate, one of the people I turn into a vampire. Okay. Later in the night, I want to chase you down the dance floor, throw you to the ground, rip your throat out. And I have this fake blood, and I'm going to grab you, stage handle you to the ground, and all that. And
then I'll probably say, okay, you could totally throw me to the ground, but I just bought this outfit, so the stage blood is probably not going to work, but throw me to the ground, get that dirty, totally okay.
All right, and I can say, I'll just put the blood in my mouth, and I won't get it. I'll try not to get any on you, and that'll be fine. And then we just play it out, and I'll just say, okay, I'm just going to grab your shoulders. I'm going to do that. And then we do workshopping for negotiating that. But if you didn't want to play with me, let's say that you had already discussed something with Kai. Right? And you had a scene. You can just say, I already discussed something with Kai. Or you could just say, I don't want to, I have something else planned, but thank you. And that's the end of it. I can't do anything to you without your consent. This probably wouldn't work with, a long-term game, a long-term vampire game. In fact, I could tell you it probably wouldn't. But in a short-term game like this, there's not really much of a benefit to saying no. It's just congratulations, you did nothing all night,
How long is your event, this event? How many hours is that one going to be, do you think, roughly?
It's going to be about 5-6 hours.
Nice.
And it's going to be, the first third is mainly going to be the mortals. While the vampires move through the crowd, picking who they're going to get. And then about 2-3 hours in, that's when things start getting weird, and people realize that all the tires have been slashed, and, it turns into, slasher horror. And then towards the end of the night, when everyone's been changed, then the real psychological horror begins, because you realize that, congratulations, you're now a monster, and you're going to be doing monstrous things, and oh, by the way, we have a war to fight. And that's going to be the more, ritualistic weirdness starts happening. And so there's 6 hours of that, but 6 hours before that, starting at noon, is workshopping, where you talk with your fellow players, you deal with them, you learn techniques, these check-in techniques, you learn negotiation techniques, and you learn where the limits are, and you learn how to do easy stage fighting techniques. So that everyone goes in, they know each other, they feel safe, and they feel, we use the term at Jackalope of go boldly into the darkness. So everyone has the confidence that everybody here is on the same page, everyone here knows the rules, and they also know these are the people who are watching after you. Because we're going to have a safety team patrolling, and they're going to be making sure, everyone's okay, and people are following those rules, and you do not want to be a person who does not follow my rules at my game. You just don't want to be.
Fair.
There are many places you want to be that day, but not in my game.
How did this idea start for the night in question?
So, in 2016, I went to Grand Masquerade. And Grand Masquerade, they debuted the American version, the first American run of a game they made called End of the Line. White Wolf commissioned this Nordic-style immersive game called End of the Line, which was a house party that had vampires in it, but most people played mortals the entire night. It was a very subtle sort of game that was played in this illegal rave party that was in the city, and there was human vampires, and there's all these weird interpersonal connections. And it was really good, and it kind of sparked my interest in this, going away from the more rock, paper, scissors, conflict-based Vampire the Masquerade game, and saying, this collaborative style, they kind of, that was the first bespoke game I ever played in. And then I got invited to go to Enlightened in Blood, which is a giant, beautiful game in Berlin, where they rented out 4 or 5 nightclubs in the club district of East Berlin.
Wow.
And there's over 150 players playing vampires, mages, changeling, werewolves on the night of the Anarch Revolt in Berlin. And it was crazy. But I was also all consent based. And you walked through the club district of Berlin with, normies about, right? In character. And these people are walking around doing that. And it was incredible. And so we started thinking, okay, they did the Anarchs, they did the Camarilla. You had Convention of Thorns, which is this lovely game. And I'm like, whoa, this is really cool. And I'm like, okay, I want to run it in Texas. I want to start doing these live action games. We started doing other ones. And I'm like, oh, who hasn't come to the table? And I'm like, oh, no one's done a Sabbat game yet. And I love the Sabbat. That's my favorite venue in the Mind's Eye Society. It's my favorite setup. I love my monsters, and I go in and I start talking to White Wolf. I say, I've been to these games. I want to do Sabbat. And they're like, are you sure? Oh, yeah. And I started, I happen to know just a lot of people who are involved in, makeup and special effects for haunted houses, who have been involved in, other horror games and stuff. So I just started talking, and we made the pitch, and we eventually, White Wolf understood. We understood the content, and we understood how to do it right. And we were partnering with PDA, the Participation Design Agency, which did End the Line, and they understood that we were able to do it. And they said, okay, let's do it. And we decided that we're just going to do something that's really going to blow their socks off, and just make this amazing visual horror experience that's just like nothing else, and something you could only really do in this immersive bespoke style. You can't do with rock paper scissors the body chandelier blood thing. You could, but it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah.
Right?
That sounds pretty amazing. I've, as some of our listeners might know, I've got a bit of a history with special effects and haunted houses and things like that, and that's how I'm planning on incorporating some of what I'm going to be doing on the West Coast with Dystopia Rising's things.
North Cal, right?
Yep, Northern California.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm really, really excited because, as you've said, there's some events that are long format. Dystopia Rising is very, very long format. I am thrilled with the idea of a shorter format, kind of self-contained, as you
set
said,
piece.
Yeah, splatterpunk performance. It's while Dystopia Rising is more like living inside The Walking Dead, you get to live inside a movie. It's a short, sweet, super opportunity for big, huge gestures.
Yeah.
That, you don't need to worry too much about the long-term accountability of certain things, so long as it creates just an amazingly intense scene at the time.
And everybody knows that if there's no waiting.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to get there, and so you come in and you just burn hot the whole way. If you burned as hot as you do in a bespoke game, in a LARP game, you'd be making a new character every 2 games. Because you'd just be going straight to the hilt, right? And you say you have 6 hours, and you got I have a connection to this person and this person, which means we have to have that shouting match now, and we're going to ramp it up immediately.
Great.
So, in a game like this, which is considered splatterpunk, how much of your horror is explicit versus implied?
Well, splatterpunk is specifically the genre, which is there's very little implied horror.
Yes.
It is, the chicken heads are nailed to the wall, and it's just it's like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Texas Chainsaw Massacre has moments of implication, but it really doesn't. It wants to get in your face. And I think it's one of the strengths of these one-shot games is the fact that we can say, yeah, you're going to be covered head to toe in guts and gore. And it's someone described this, and this is the best compliment I've ever gotten. This is the gore concert of LARPs. So
Oh, that's pretty perfect.
yeah, as opposed to, a more, if we're going to, Dystopia Rising is more death metal, it's creepy,
Yeah.
but it's more long form. This is, we're getting out the blood hose and we're going to have a good time. And I think that's the real strength of that form, is that you can just go and you can have those big set pieces, and you can just, everyone doesn't stop. They know they can't stop. You're in this to win it. You're in it, and you win by having a fantastic experience and giving other people a fantastic experience.
Why do you think people are fascinated with this type of genre?
Horror? Oh, wow. I mean, I think there's transgression. Mm-hmm. I think there's the fear of death. I think that it's so out there. It's why do people find serial killers fascinating? It's because it's boundless. Mm-hmm. Real serial killers are usually, very sad people. But the movie serial killer, the Hannibal Lecter, very few serial killers are actually like him. In fact, none of them are. But that the idea of that pure id, that thing that just knows no limits and just does things because it wants to, I think people are both fascinated and repelled by it. And I think that there's also this thing of you're dealing with mortality, and you're dealing with the adrenaline of dealing with that kind of stuff. So I I think there's a lot to be said about it, and also just something so alien, like being in the room with something which sees you as food, but is talking with you like a person. That's creepy, and I think that maybe, I mean, if you want to get philosophical about it, I mean, we live in a fairly safe world. We don't have lions and tigers behind every corner. You know, the likelihood that you know somebody that's going to get murdered is pretty low in, you know, modern America. And we live in a pretty safe place. And I think that there's this part of our brain which is nonetheless drawn to that which is not in our life and that which we don't experience. And part of that is the idea of horror is that. And I think there's also some catharsis in getting out that kind of, like, horror and fear and like aggression in a safe way, because I think that we, as balanced human beings, we care about each other and we want to have empathy, but at the same time, I think there's part of us who kind of like craves being boundless, and this provides us a safe way of kind of indulging that. And I mean, everyone knows the villains are always the most fun to play, and I think it's because of the catharsis of being. But that's not why I play villains. That was hard for me to figure out. Is that the thing I like about playing villains is being the person that people remember, and being the person that people look to and say, that changed me. That changed my experience. Is dealing with this person who was just a little bit outside the bounds. Or way outside the bounds.
So some of this reminds me of something that at the time when Del Toro won his award for The Shape of Water, he delivered a beautiful speech about monsters. And if it's okay, I'd like to read a quick little piece from this. He said, "Since childhood, I've been faithful to monsters. I have been saved and absolved by them. Monsters, I believe, are the patron saints of our blissful imperfections."
Wow. That's a good line.
Yeah.
That's a good line.
Yeah. And that when you were talking about this, I immediately started thinking of that, of like, you know, monsters, it's a degree of catharsis and involving yourself, and I feel that resonates a little bit with what you were saying there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think that you also get to play with shadow. Like there's a really great artistic movement in Britain who called the Stuckists, and they're very kind of like anti-establishment, very punk. And they say that the point of art is to make peace with wild dogs and track down shadows. And that's such a great line. But like we have these wild dogs in us. We have these wild dogs in our civilization. We have these things we want to kind of track down and make peace with, or kind of integrate with ourselves, or explore. Like there's the shadow and there's the outsider, right? Those are the two monsters. The outsider is never going to be me. It is something coming from the out. It is from the dark. It is from the darkness and only from the darkness. And that's the outsider. That's the alien is the ultimate one, or that. But there's this other kind, which is the shadow. That's the other type of antagonist, the other type of monster. And that's this could be me, or this could be this is part of me, or this is something I could become. And that's a real difference between some types of monsters, like the xenomorphs and the predators and stuff from like those films. Those are outsiders. Those are blatant outsiders.
Or like the Lovecraftian kind of creatures too.
Exactly, right. But Lovecraft, the ghouls in Lovecraft are shadows, right? The serial killer is a shadow character. He's not an outsider character. If I took your conscience away and I gave you absolute confidence, what would you become? And probably not a very nice person very quickly. And I think that's why people like the villains, is that they represent the shadow that we kind of like playing at, because we look at something and we go, there's some part of me that, like the call of the abyss, right, is something I've heard it called, where just like, I want to watch this. I would never want to be in the room with this in real life, but I kind of want to deal with this for a while in order to kind of like come to peace with my own feelings, so I can then return to civilization after I've done with it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And super true. At least I feel I super agree there.
I mean, some people don't get it. I mean, I respect that they don't get it, but I think enough people get it that it's important to have it. You know?
Some people like darker things. Some people like lighter things. It's very much a taste perspective. But
It's about consent.
Yes.
Yeah, it's about consenting to what and knowing what you're getting into.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's very hard for me to play a villain. And for the longest time, that was actually one critique people have made of you. It's like you're always playing the person who's rescuing people, the person who's healing people, the person that's always negotiating things on behalf of others for the better benefit. And after a while, it kind of got to me that it's like, I can't play a villain because it's just not my interest. So when I had to begin to play a villain for the sake of a game, I had to figure out like what's going to be the most easy thing for me that is villainous, and that was to be a good guy but do things for the good. It's because it's for your own good, no matter how harmful it actually was. And once I got into that mindset, it gave me a very strange empathy for people who were villainous, but at the same time realizing that, okay, that is perilously close to what a hero is. Just that shift in perspective is what makes things different between good and evil.
I love playing villains who can sit there and they can argue their position. I also love playing pure monsters, like the ones that are just pure id. Like, I mean, there's the character that most recently I saw playing in the Sabat Mind's Eye Society game. Pierce Cross was just a psychotic serial killer, and he was just a catty, snarky guy who also just happened to like killing mortals and turning them into sculptures, and that's what he did. And it was fantastic. But he was fun because he was like almost semi-comical, but people then realized like, oh, he's a catty court. Oh my fucking god! Just like, oh, you didn't know this was part of the deal. But he was very much a direct antagonist. But I also love playing the character who will sit down and say, I'm going to tell you exactly the way I am, and I'm going to tell you why I'm right, and you're going to have a really hard time arguing with me.
The Thanos-style villains, huh?
Yes. The very kind of like, you don't say understand. You know, I was once as ignorant as you. You know, and that's another aspect of the Sabat, for instance, and the Vampire are great characters because they have both those aspects. They have the pure, unbridled monsters, but they can also turn around and say, like with Toreador and their arts and so forth, they always say, you know, oh no, the reason you don't like me is that I'm what you would be if you would just be honest with what you were.
Oh, that's insidious.
And there's other characters like how do you play a tyrant? How do you play a oligarch? Or political horror is a very interesting thing to play with. And this comes up in LARP because often the antagonists are political. They're people who are in charge or so on and so forth. Like, and so how do you do it? And you just, like, one of the best speeches I had is just like, you know what? This was a mentor character who was a very bad guy. But he was a mentor to another character who's been called upon to basically kill a bunch of rebels, a bunch of anarchs. And there was this speech that someone wrote down, thankfully, because he said, if you insist on seeing them as human, just remember that this is what you are about to do is the product of choices they have made and they were told the consequences of, and yet they continue to do it. Not only that, it is the choices they have made, their sires have made, their sires' sires have made, and they have made such a debt on the ledger of justice that you are completely justified in doing whatever is necessary to balance it.
And dramatic pause. Wow.
Yeah.
Whew.
Wow.
And that is the mentality of someone who's just willing to kill people because they deserve it. And the idea that you can lay the sins of their fathers and their fathers' fathers and their fathers' fathers' fathers upon them, because it's not about good or evil, it's about justice. And once you can put things in that terms, but the most important thing about those characters is that you can recognize their villains, and then you can say, wait a second, that's how villains talk. And that's such a compelling argument, but suddenly there's a thing where you deal with monsters in fiction so you know how to deal with them in real life. And when you encounter someone talking like that, you suddenly realize what happens when that check comes due. Where does that lead? It leads to a bunch of crematoria is where it leads, and maybe we should be aware of that when people start talking about that. Yeah.
It seems very apropos to current events. It's very real.
Yeah, it's very real. But would you ever have a conversation with someone who was convincing and talking to you directly, unless it was in a game?
Almost no.
Yep.
Almost no.
And from a position of safety, where I'm not actually convincing you to do something.
Right.
But I'm someone who knows those arguments, who is able to make them in a convincing way in a safe environment. So, because we play games to simulate real life. Mm-hmm. That's like the fundamental game, right? Mm-hmm. Why do kids chase each other? So they know how to run.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that it's important to have these conversations as we go into a game like that, and go into a game like The Night in Question, where people understand why these characters exist and why you can play a extremely monstrous character without desiring it. You're deconstructing it, and and you're also playing a role in the fiction to do that. So I think it's important to talk about the sources of that sort of stuff in order to really build on that, and in order to build a healthy game that people feel comfortable with, where they understand these antagonists are not wish fulfillment. And anyone who gets wish fulfillment out of an antagonist, you kind of need to look at them askance, and you need to look at the kind of like itch they're scratching, and you need to make sure that the people who are playing antagonists are not doing it to fulfill some urges that kind of make them probably not the best people to LARP with. And I think that's what turns off people from a lot of antagonistic characters, is the fact that some people play them for not very healthy reasons, let's just say. Mm-hmm. And I think we've all encountered things like that. So I think it's important to have the conversation about why we play monsters. Yeah. And recognize there's some unhealthy ways of playing them.
That kind of dialogue, I think, is very important. And one of the things that I plan to do is, as with the long form of Dystopia Rising, as I'm running games of it, I'm going to start getting a finger on the pulse of like which characters are more antagonistic and which aren't. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to sit them down and basically be like, I see what kind of direction you're going in. It's totally fine. But let's talk about the responsibilities here. Right,
because you have more responsibility to the character as a monster. You have more responsibility to the story as a monster, not less. You no longer get to say, it's just what my character would do.
Yes.
You've lost that right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I feel the sooner that is communicated to my players who decide to play in that manner, the easier transition it will be, and the least amount of like unforeseen expectations might potentially come up.
And the people who push back at that, let's just be honest, that's a pretty good canary in that coal mine.
Yes.
Let's just face it, there are such a thing as problem players.
Of course.
In fact, yes.
That is an unfortunate truth, and I can only imagine, I mean, in America, and I've mentioned this before on other things, in Europe, it's roughly like 1 in 10 to 1 to 5 people play LARP in most European countries. Mm-hmm. In America, I don't know the number, but it's nowhere near that. It might be 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. I'm not sure.
The LARP census came about 50,000 to 100,000 LARPers.
Yeah.
In America, which we have 500 million.
Yeah. So it's even less.
Right.
And I see no reason why, with the way that Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing and just everything nerdy is just kind of golden aging up right now, the LARP is the next thing that's going to start floodgating. And
you're already seeing that. There's games all over the place, and that's why the reason why we're trying to make Jackalope Live Action games and do some cool stuff and start, like, you know, The Night in Question is just one project amongst many.
Are there any other projects that you're able to potentially talk about?
Oh, yes. The one I'm really excited about starting next year, we're going to start developing. We discussed with our Telsorian Games, and we got the license to do Cyberpunk 2020.
That's incredible. So, I mean, I love Cyberpunk. My 3 favorite kind of genres are horror, post-apoc, and cyberpunk, and I have way too many questions that I will not inundate you with. But what are some of your kind of ideas of creating an immersive environment to try and project a cyberpunk world?
So one of
that you might try to tackle.
The name of the project is Cyberpunk Night City, and it's going to probably be run first in Texas because that's closest to where we're based. But we want to travel around with it, and the idea is that we're going to create a cityscape environment, which we're going to go in and we're going to Blade Runner it up. We're going to add neon. We're going to add the required blue and red lights, and we're going to go in and we're going to create this immersive environment out of, like, if we can find an old city block, if we can find, like, an abandoned building, and we're going to make it into, like, underground market and all this stuff, because one of the cool concepts, and this faded from view a little bit as the series went on, but one of the original things that was written by Michael Pondsmith, who's a fantastic guy, fantastic game designer, is that Night City is everywhere. Your city is Night City when the sun goes down. Your city becomes Night City when you encounter a place that's more lit by neon than by the street lights, and where the shadows just get a little bit darker, and you realize this is the place where things that shouldn't happen. And we want to kind of establish that feel, because the cyberpunk is this genre which allows us to talk about what is actually going on right now in a way that people will believe it. And I had the joy of actually sitting down with William Gibson once and asking him if cyberpunk is predictive or descriptive. Does it tell us what the future is, or does it just describe how the world is now? And he said the problem with fiction is it's always lags by 5 years. People don't believe what is going on right now because it's too new.
Yeah.
Science fiction, especially cyberpunk, allows us to talk about what is actually already happening in a way that people will believe it. And I think that that's the real power of cyberpunk. So I think we need to create this world that seems... to quote one of the best ones, this would be the universe that happens 5 minutes into the future. Right? Yeah, to quote Max Headroom. Right?
That's so good.
Yeah. So I want to do that, and I want to create this environment where... But on top of that, we actually... one of the things that really got me started in LARP was doing augmented reality. We ran Planetfall, and it's still running, which is the first campaign game that involves augmented reality features. And we have, we use cell phones and that sort of stuff. We're going to be using augmented reality technology in Cyberpunk, where if you're a, hacker, you can go up to a port and you can start hacking the system and get information based on it, like on a tablet computer or something like that. And you can do all this stuff, and you can wave like a camera around the environment and see like rendered 3D models of things in the cyber web and things like that. So we want to make this like enriched like science fiction environment, but we also want it to be gritty and street level, and it's about, we want that high-tech low life sort of feel.
That's a great term.
Yeah.
That is a great
I can't
term
lay
system.
claim to that. That's actually from GURP Cyberpunk.
Okay.
Also a fantastic RPG.
Yep.
Secret Service, please don't raid me.
Yeah.
If you don't know what I reference, look it up. It'll blow your mind.
I actually one of the cyberpunk games that I've played in, it was published in England, and I haven't heard anything about it in a long time because of it. So the system that I was really fond of, and I grew up on with a little bit of Cyberpunk, a little bit of Shadowrun, and a little bit of this third one called Slay Industries.
I've heard of this. Yeah. I've never seen the rulebook for it, though.
There were 2 editions, lots of amazing visuals for it and things. And it was a little more focused on, there is one all-encompassing mega company that owns everything, and everyone works for, but the subsidiaries kind of fight between each other.
Right.
And any rival companies which are not part of that giant umbrella are actually more like invaders or terrorists. Because this one mega company controls everything. And so, and it's not even just, it's interplanetary, it isn't just one planet. So there's different alien races and like genetically modified kind of people, and all of these different aspects. And what I found so interesting with that one is like a lot of cyberpunk settings are kind of hidden in the dark.
Right.
This one was more kind of brought into the light where you could do shadow ops, but it was also supplemented with whenever you're kind of going around, as an operative of Slay Industries, you kind of became a celebrity. You could take part in game shows. You could get sponsorships. You could become a sports star, and you could kind of like go further with those angles of it.
There's a big tradition in Cyberpunk of that. Like, you have like the high tech, low life Shadowrun sort of thing, but you also have like the Running Man. The Running Man is totally a cyberpunk thing, and the old Schwarzenegger movie. But there's that other aspect of it, or Smash TV.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like anything that seems like it's just 5 minutes into the future. You know, and that's very 5 minutes into the future.
Well, you imagine Escape from LA or Escape from New York, and you then televise it.
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's really dystopian and really kind of a little too close to what you could believe kind of thing. Like,
to do Cyberpunk, it has to be how technology, including the development of social technology, like new ways of doing things, alters everyday human life, especially the dark side of it. That's all that you need to do Cyberpunk. You can do like Black Mirror. That is a Cyberpunk series. Yeah. Even like old school like Twilight Zone. There's some episodes you can see the echoes, like the beginnings of like the Cyberpunk, the idea of the man versus the machine and all that, and how things change.
I think what I like the most about Black Mirror is how so close and parallel it is, and then just it's like that one little dial that got turned up just a couple more clicks, and you're like, I can really believe this. I can really understand it. As it slowly like builds it up on the episode, and then before you realize, you're kind of like that frog in the boiling water, and you're like, there's no escape. This is really uncomfortable.
Welcome to 5 minutes into the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's the real point of Cyberpunk, is to talk about what's happening now in a way that we'll believe it.
I cannot wait to see what you produce with that franchise.
It's going to be fantastic, and we're also going to be doing more White Wolf stuff and stuff like that. So just keep an eye on us. I'm sure it'll give me an opportunity to get my website and Twitter and all that.
I mean, speaking of all of that, like, where can people reach your website, Twitter, contact info on social media?
We are Jackalope LARP on Twitter. We are Jackalope Live Action Studios on Facebook, and our website is jackalope-larp.com. And that will have all of our recent events, and you can just click on the front page is the link to the night in question. You can see the trailer and the rules and all of our design blog on it and everything.
And that event is in November, and it's almost sold out.
November 17th is when it is in Austin, Texas. And there's a little under 40 tickets left out of about 200.
Nice.
So yeah, it's going to be a big game.
Yes.
And this, I don't think it's going to be possible not to have fun with the amount of people that are keyed up to do this. And there's some really great people showing up, so I'm so happy to do it. We have such a great team. We have Peyton Moe doing being our prop mistress, and we have Ashley Bless. They're doing all the creative directing, and we have a great writer team. Too many people to name. And it's being fantastic. And White Wolf got back to us. We had to submit all the characters, and they're like, "This is really good." Like, everyone's really happy, and I'm so blessed with such an awesome team. It's amazing.
Hi, your social medias?
As always, it's Yokai Props, YOKAI PROPS on the Instagrams and Twitters and all of the social media type things. So it's pretty easy to find me. So if you want to goob about costumes and LARP and those type of things, just send me a message on there, and I would be happy to chat with people.
And this is Ryan Omega. You can find me on Instagram under Ryan Omega. You could find me on Twitter under Ryan OMGA. And like Kai, I'm easy to talk to. Just send me messages on Twitter. I always like to respond to people, and feedback and questions and all of these things are wonderful. And before I forget, I want to thank our Patreon supporters, especially Twin Mask, Lost Colonies out in Virginia, and Geeky Tees for continuing support, as well as all of our other Patreon supporters. So thank you so much. And that wraps it up for today's episode of Live Action Roleplay. But until next time, bye!
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.